within the Caribbean, we have a range of activities that are taking place. First of all, disaster risk reduction, more or less what we call disaster management, is carried out by a separate entity, Management and Emergency Agency, SEDEMA, while climate change is carried out by the CARICOM Climate Change Center. So they are two separate entities. Nonetheless, in their recent, that's the SEDEMA's recent strategy to address disaster risk reduction in the Caribbean, they have taken from the Climate Change Center aspects of their strategic framework and included it within their draft strategy. So first of all, you're starting at that strategic level to integrate the two aspects. Outside of that, we see disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation as two sides of the same coin. Because to the extent we're able to reduce disaster or to enhance disaster risk reduction, we also beginning to adapt to climate change. Now, there are a range of activities that we have carried out specifically in terms of climate adaptation that will also have a disaster risk reduction element attached therein. For example, we are looking at enhancing water security within a number of our small island states. One of the things we are focusing on there is largely to produce quality water through the use of reverse osmosis systems, where we're utilizing a renewable energy source. So on the one hand, we are also addressing mitigation and adaptation. Additionally, we recognize that quite often entities that are critical to the sustenance of our people, particularly in the event of a disaster such as medical facilities and hospitals, are some of those that are the first hit, and sometimes they are not up and running when people need them. So we are following an initiative called Smart Hospitals Initiative, where again we are looking to retrofit and enhance their capacity. We're retrofitting them with solar panels rather than them being connected just to the national grid that utilizes largely fossil fuel, so that even if the energy supply goes down, they will still have a backup source so that the hospitals can function, the medical centers can function, because a lot of times these are the facilities that people need so that they can continue their lives and build the resilience of those island states. Well, I think one of the challenges, as I indicated earlier, is the fact that you have the two issues being addressed on the two separate entities. As a result, marrying the two is not always as easy and as simple as straightforward as we may wish them to be, because each entity would have their own mandate. The mandates largely come from the heads of government, particularly in the case of the Disaster Risk Management Agency. They're a subvention receiving agency, so they get subventions from government, and once you're getting subvention, they will set the agenda. So that's one of the critical issues that we have to overcome. In other words, greater interagency collaboration and cooperation is what we need to be seeing going forward. This cannot be done without the requisite legislative framework as well being in place that will lend itself to that kind of collaboration and cooperation, and the fact that we recognize that we are dealing with some of the same issues. Having recognized this fact, however, we just don't want to focus on what are the challenges. We have recognized those challenges, and one of the ways we have sought to overcome them is that we have established a cluster. Now that cluster includes the 5 Cs, it includes SEDEMA, it includes our Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, it includes the Caribbean Agricultural Research Development Institute, and the University of the West Indies. Why the University of the West Indies? Because they're the ones that are doing most of our scientific work, and that work needs to feed into our analysis. So in a way, we are now establishing greater collaborative frameworks in terms of how we can work going forward. Issues related to climate change, disaster risk reduction, are still fairly new. Therefore, we don't think that we have all the answers. to the extent that we're able to learn from others, it's always important, because there may be something that's happening in the Pacific, for example, or in Africa, or somewhere else, which can inform the kinds of modalities or adaptation interventions that we make. And so we see this as an opportunity for us to share experiences, share knowledge, and therefore better help us to address some of the same challenges which are faced across our different regions. Well, I think they have sought in many ways to deepen the kind of South-South cooperation. This is testimony to that by bringing us together for a second time. They have sought in many ways to ensure that information keeps flowing back and forth. I think the real test will be not just what's happening when the project is on, it's what happens after the project is finished. Whether we can sustain that kind of dialogue amongst the various regions. But I think they have started that process, and the actual impact of it is going to be felt later on. But clearly, we are hearing some of the set stories from like regions, and we, in some ways, it gives us comfort that, you know, some of the things we are doing are replicated elsewhere, and so we are not too far off the beaten path, if you can call it that. But at the same time, there are other things that are happening, particularly when we talk about things like ecosystem-based adaptation approaches, which we in the Caribbean can learn from the Pacific on in particular. We are looking at issues of energy security and how we can enhance our energy security and so forth. So there are a lot of things that are happening which we are beginning to learn from, but I think it's a bit too early to be thinking about what the outcomes and impacts of those will be. I can speak for the Caribbean. I'm not aware that we are working largely with more policy based, because the way we operate largely is we are servicing 14 sovereign member states plus another member state who is not sovereign, and the program also extends to the DR, Dominican Republic, and Cuba. Our specific mandate is to address issues related to climate change for those member states. In order to do this, we have developed a regional strategy and an accompanying implementation plan, which went through extensive dialoguing, a consultative process, the feedback we got from NGOs, private sector, civil society, the works. But then this had to go to the heads of government for them to agree and to sign off on. So at that level, yes, we have that dialogue going. We also have a council of ministers where we are often asked to attend and report on what's happening, not only on the EU GCCA project, but on the larger programs that we have going, of which the EU GCCA is one such component. So that dialogue is very active. Well, it comes down to the architecture of the climate financing arrangement. I don't want to seem to be creating divisions between adaptation and mitigation, but that's largely the way it's structured. And when we speak to mitigation, we're speaking about reducing emissions. We speak about adaptation, we're speaking about adapting to a changing climate regime. Much of the monies basically are going into mitigation. Now, as you would know, small island developing states' carbon footprint is minuscule, so they wouldn't have significant investments for mitigation. What we'd have significant investments for is adaptation. So since most of the monies are going into mitigation, you could understand why there is that skewed distribution of funds. Outside of that, most of the mitigation efforts require scale. And when we speak of scale, small islands don't have those scale to allow for economies of scale to be derived. So as an investor, you're going to go after where scale is present, such as in in your Brazil, your India, your China, your Indonesia, your South Africa. So we keep being left back. And we think that if that's to be addressed, even under the Adaptation Fund and the Green Climate Fund, we would have to be thinking of some way of carving out a niche for small island states, because if not, then the people who need assistance the most are the people who are not going to be getting it. Well, one of the things we're working with on the GIZ is what we call climate finance readiness. In other words, to look at the capacity present within countries and regional organizations, and I speak of regional organizations inclusive of our development banks, such as the Caribbean Development Bank, to ensure that we understand the various windows, because it's a maze out there. And it doesn't mean that every single window is necessarily applicable to us. So to understand how we can navigate the various hoops that we often have to go through, what capacities need to be built, and as well to ensure that we are ready. Now, one of the things that will allow us to be fully prepared as well is greater assistance in terms of having what we may call a portfolio of ready-to-finance investment projects. How are we to get these? Some of the assistance we require would require technical expertise in helping us to develop these proposals. So it's one thing about me saying what we need to do is enhance the engineering solution, but do we have the engineers who could help us write those project documents and have them ready and presented in a way that is acceptable for financing? So I think in terms of climate finance readiness, donors do have an opportunity there to work with the region and with our partners to ensure that that is being done. We feel that the EU GCCA program has contributed largely in helping us to build our resilience to climate change. We do recognize that it is but a contributor to what is required in the region. And we didn't expect that it's going to solve all our problems, but it has begun to take us down a path where this can be addressed. And we do look forward to further collaboration and efforts whereby we can surely strengthen what has started here. What we are particularly interested and pleased about was that the program did offer us some flexibility, because I know where we started out is not where we have ended up. And so we are very happy about that, and we hope that that can continue going forward.